The millionaire bought the diner to be close to her, but when she found out, she thought he was trying to control her. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and fried bacon hung in the air as Harper Mason wiped down the counter at the Sunrise Diner for the 1000th time that morning. It was a ritual she performed almost unconsciously, a habit ingrained after years of working in the small establishment in the heart of Portland, Oregon. The doorbell jingled, announcing the arrival of yet another customer. Harper looked up, her gaze meeting that of a man she had never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, with a watch that probably cost more than she earned in a year. He seemed out of place in the unpretentious atmosphere of the diner. "Good morning," she greeted with a professional smile. "Sit wherever you like. I'll bring the menu." The man nodded, choosing a table near the window. His eyes roamed the place, taking in every detail, from the faded walls to the scratched Formica tables. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of curiosity and nostalgia. Harper approached, handing over the laminated menu. "My name is Harper. If you need any recommendations, just ask." "Actually," he replied, his voice surprisingly soft, "I'd like whatever you think is the best dish in the house." She arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "Well, in that case, I recommend the waffles with berries and our special blend of coffee. It's an unbeatable combination." "Sounds perfect," he smiled, handing back the menu without even opening it. As Harper walked away to place her order, she couldn't help but notice the way the man continued to examine the place. There was something in his eyes, a kind of determination that she couldn't quite decipher. Minutes later, when she returned with the order, she found him engrossed in a phone call. His voice was low, but she caught fragments of the conversation. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Arrange a meeting with the owner as soon as possible." Harper put her plate on the table, trying not to show that she had heard something. The man quickly ended the call, turning his attention back to her. "Thank you," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "By the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Alexander Reed." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Reed," Harper replied, feeling a strange tension in the air. "I hope you like the coffee." Alexander took a sip and his eyes lit up. "Extraordinary. You were right about it being special." Over the next few days, Alexander became a regular customer. He always sat at the same table, ordered the same dish, and spent hours watching the diner go by, sometimes working on his laptop. Other times, just enjoying the atmosphere. Harper couldn't deny that she was intrigued. There was something in the air, a feeling that something big was about to happen. And somehow she knew it was related to Alexander Reed. One morning, about 2 weeks after Alexander's first visit, Harper arrived at work to find her boss, Mr. Thompson, with a worried expression. "Harper, darling, can we talk?" he called out, gesturing to his office. Her heart racing, she followed him. Mr. Thompson had owned the Sunrise Diner for more than 3 decades. He was a kind man who treated his employees like family. "What happened?" Harper asked, sitting down in the chair opposite his table. Mr. Thompson sighed deeply. "I got an offer to sell the diner, an offer that, well, that I can't refuse." Harper felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The Sunrise Diner was more than just her workplace. It was her home, her refuge. It was there that she found stability after years of struggling to settle in a new city. But you can't sell," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "This place is... it's..." "I know, dear," Mr. Thompson interrupted her gently. "Believe me, this was not an easy decision. But Janet, my wife, is not in good health. We need to move closer to our children. And this offer, well, it will give us the financial comfort we need right now." Harper felt tears forming in her eyes. She understood, of course she did. But that didn't make the news any less painful. Who made the offer?" she asked, dreading the answer. Mr. Thompson hesitated for a moment. A businessman, Alexander Reed. The name struck Harper like a bolt of lightning. Suddenly, everything made sense. The frequent visits, the long observations, the mysterious phone calls. Alexander wasn't just a customer. He'd been planning to buy the diner all along. Rushing out of the office, Harper ran to the bathroom, locking herself in a cubicle. She let the tears flow freely, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and surprisingly betrayal, Although Alexander was just a customer, she had begun to enjoy his conversations. The way he seemed genuinely interested in her stories about the diner and the regulars. After a few minutes, she pulled herself together, washed her face and returned to the lounge. And there he was, Alexander Reed, sitting at his usual table, as if nothing had happened. With firm steps, Harper approached him. "Your usual breakfast, Mr. Reed?" she asked, her voice as cold as ice. Alexander looked at her, immediately noticing the change in her demeanor. "Harper, is everything all right?" "Perfectly," she replied, her tone making it clear that nothing was fine. "Just wondering if I should worry about looking for a new job or if the new owner plans to keep the current staff." Alexander's eyes widened in surprise. "So you already know?" "Yes, I know," Harper replied, her voice now trembling slightly. "What I don't understand is why. Why pretend to be just a customer? Why not be honest from the start?" Alexander stood up, his face a mixture of guilt and determination. "Harper, it's not what you think. But Harper was already walking away, unable to listen to any explanation at that moment. Her mind was in turmoil, filled with unanswered questions and fears about the future. The rest of the day passed like a blur. Harper attended to customers mechanically, her smile never reaching her eyes. Every time the door opened, she dreaded seeing Alexander again. But he didn't return. At the end of her shift, emotionally and physically exhausted, Harper stepped out into the cold Portland night. The lights of the city shone in the distance, but to her everything seemed dark. As she walked home, her mind wandered. What would happen to the Sunrise Diner now? What could a millionaire like Alexander Reed want with a small neighborhood diner? And why? Despite all her anger and confusion, couldn't she stop thinking about him? With a deep sigh, Harper looked up at the starry sky. Tomorrow would be another day, and with it would come answers, or perhaps more questions. She knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change drastically, and Alexander Reed was at the center of it. The next morning dawned gray and rainy in Portland, perfectly reflecting Harper's mood. She walked towards the Sunrise Diner with heavy steps, the fine rain soaking her coat. As she approached, she noticed a familiar figure standing in front of the entrance. Alexander Reed. Harper felt her heart racing, a mixture of anger and anxiety taking hold of her. For a moment, she considered turning around and walking away, but she knew she couldn't run away forever. Taking a deep breath, she approached. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Alexander turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was an intensity in his gaze that took her by surprise. "Harper, I needed to talk to you. About yesterday, about everything. There's a lot I need to explain." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded briefly. "All right, but not out here in the rain. Let's go inside." Inside the cafeteria, the familiar aroma of coffee and fresh bread would normally calm her down, but today it only served to accentuate the feeling that everything was about to change. Harper guided Alexander to a table at the back, away from the prying ears of the other employees who were starting to arrive. "Talk," she said simply, crossing her arms over her chest. Alexander took a deep breath, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "First, I want to apologize for the way things turned out. It wasn't my intention to deceive you or anyone else." "Then what was your intention?" Harper interrupted, unable to contain the frustration in her voice. "Because spending weeks pretending to be just a customer sounds a lot like deception to me." "I wanted to understand this place," Alexander replied, his voice soft but intense. "Not just as a business, but as a home for people. For you." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Harper, I grew up in a small town not unlike this one. There was a diner there, much like the Sunrise Diner. It was the heart of the community. When it closed, well, it was as if the soul of the place had been ripped out." Harper felt her anger falter a little, replaced by reluctant curiosity. "And what does that have to do with buying this place?" "Everything," Alexander replied with a sad smile. You see, I made my fortune in the corporate world, but I always felt that something was missing. When I heard that the Sunrise Diner might be for sale, I saw an opportunity, not just to make a good investment, but to preserve something special. Harper shook her head, confused. But why all this play acting? Why not simply present yourself as an interested buyer from the start? Alexander leaned forward, his eyes shining with an intensity Harper hadn't seen before. Because I wanted to be sure. Certainty that this place was really special, that it was worth fighting for. And most importantly, he paused, as if gathering his courage. I wanted to get to know you, Harper, without the barriers that a title like potential buyer would create. Harper felt her face heat up, taken aback by the raw honesty in his words. I don't understand. Why would I be so important in this decision? Because you're the heart of this place, Alexander replied without hesitation. On all my visits, I've observed how you interact with customers, how you take care of this space. You're not just working here. You belong to this place, and it belongs to you. Silence fell between them, heavy with the implications of Alexander's words. Harper felt her mind spinning, trying to process everything she was hearing. Part of her wanted to believe him, to see the sincerity in his eyes. But another part, the part that had been hurt so many times before, remained wary. And now? She finally asked, her voice little more than a whisper. What happens to the Sunrise Diner? With the people who depend on this place? Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. That, Harper, depends largely on you. I don't just want to buy this place. I want to transform it, make it even better. But I can't do that alone. I need someone who understands the soul of this place, someone who cares as much as I do. Harper blinked in surprise. You're offering me a job? I'm offering a partnership, Alexander corrected gently. I want you to be my partner in this venture. Your experience, your knowledge of clients and the community are invaluable. The proposal caught Harper completely off guard. She opened her mouth to reply, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was in turmoil, weighing up the possibilities, the risks, the opportunities. Just then, the door to the diner opened and Mr. Thompson walked in, looking tired but resigned. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Harper and Alexander sitting together. Ah, I see you two have already met formally, he said, approaching the table. Harper stood up abruptly, still processing everything Alexander had said. Mr. Thompson, The old landlord held up a hand, gently interrupting her. It's all right, Harper. In fact, I'm glad to see you two talking. Alexander here told me about your intentions for the place, and I must say I was impressed. Alexander also stood up, extending his hand to Mr. Thompson. Thank you for your confidence, Entamo, sir. I promise I'll take good care of this place. Harper watched the interaction, feeling like she was in a strange dream. Everything was happening so fast, changes she hadn't even imagined 24 hours ago. What about the other employees? She asked suddenly, remembering her colleagues, some of whom had worked at Sunrise for years. What about them? Alexander turned to her, his gaze soft. As I said, Harper, I want to preserve what makes this place special. That includes the people. No one will be fired. In fact, with the plans I have in mind, we'll probably need to hire more people. Mr. Thompson nodded, looking relieved. That's true. Alexander assured me that all the jobs are safe. It was one of the reasons I felt comfortable accepting his offer. Harper felt a wave of relief run through her body. At least, that was one worry less. But there were still so many questions, so many uncertainties. I need some time, she finally said, looking from Alexander to Mr. Thompson. That's a lot to process in one go. Alexander nodded understandingly. Of course, take all the time you need. But, Harper, he hesitated for a moment, then continued. Please consider my offer. I believe that together we can do something really special here. Harper reached for her apron, putting it on automatically. I'll think about it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. As she walked away to start her shift, Harper could feel the gazes of Alexander and Mr. Thompson on her back. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours, and she still wasn't sure how she felt about it. Throughout the day, as she served the regulars and prepared the usual orders, Harper couldn't get the conversation out of her head. The idea of being a business partner, of having a voice in the running of the Sunrise Diner, was both exciting and frightening. And then there was Alexander. There was something about him, a sincerity in his eyes when he talked about preserving the spirit of the place, that intrigued her. But she also couldn't ignore the feeling of having been tricked, even if his intentions were good. When her shift finally ended, Harper stepped out into the Portland night, which was now clear after the day's rain. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and she found herself imagining what it would be like to see the Sunrise Diner shining between them, renovated but still familiar. As she walked home, Harper knew she had an important decision to make. A decision that would not only affect her future, but the future of a place that had become her home. With a deep sigh, she looked up at the stars above, seeking some kind of guidance. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would give Alexander her answer, but for now she needed a night to think, to weigh up her options, and perhaps to dream of the possibilities that the future might bring. The morning came too quickly for Harper. She had spent most of the night tossing and turning in bed, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Alexander's proposal echoed in her head, along with the implications of becoming business partners with a man she barely knew. While getting ready for work, Harper looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were tired, but there was a determination in them that hadn't been there the day before. She had made her decision. The road to the Sunrise Diner had never seemed so long. Every step took her closer to a future that was uncertain, but also full of possibilities. When she finally arrived, she saw Alexander waiting at the entrance, his face a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Good morning, Harper," he said softly. "I hope I'm not being too pushy, but—" "It's all right," Harper interrupted him, taking a deep breath. "Actually, I'm glad you're here. I have an answer for you." Alexander's eyes lit up, but he held back, waiting patiently for her to continue. "I accept," Harper finally said, her voice firm. "But with a few conditions." Alexander nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Sure, anything. Shall we go in and talk about it?" They entered the cafeteria, which was still empty at that time of the morning. They sat down at a table at the back, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air as one of the cooks began to prepare the kitchen for the day. "So," Alexander began, leaning forward with interest, "what are your conditions?" Harper straightened her shoulders, feeling a confidence she didn't know she possessed. "First, I want written guarantees that none of the current employees will be dismissed without cause. These people are like family to me." Alexander nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. We can include that in the partnership agreement." "Secondly," Harper continued, "I want to have a say in all the important decisions about the future of the eatery. I don't want to be just a familiar face to customers while you make all the decisions behind the scenes." "That's more than fair," Alexander agreed. "In fact, that's exactly why I want you as a partner. Your knowledge and connection to this place are invaluable." Harper paused, gathering her courage for her last condition. "And third, I want to understand exactly why you're doing this. Not just the noble motives you mentioned earlier, but also the financial side. I want to see the figures, understand the business plan. If I'm going to be your partner, I need to fully understand what I'm getting into." For a moment, Alexander looked surprised, but then his face opened into a smile of admiration. "Harper, you continue to amaze me. Of course you'll have access to all this information. In fact, I'd expect nothing less from a partner." With the conditions set, they spent the next hour discussing the preliminary details of the partnership. Alexander explained his vision for Sunrise Diner: to keep its welcoming essence, but modernize some areas, expand the menu, and possibly even open branches in other Portland neighborhoods. As they talked, Harper felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension growing inside her. It was exciting to think of all the possibilities, but also daunting to consider the magnitude of the change that was about to take place in her life. As the first customers began to arrive, Harper realized it was time to start her shift. "I think we need to continue this conversation later," she said, standing up. Alexander agreed, also getting up. "Sure. How about we meet up after your shift? We can go somewhere quieter to discuss the details." Harper hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right. There's a cafe a few blocks from here. Can we meet there at 6 p.m.? Perfect, Alexander smiled. I can't wait. As Alexander left, Harper put on her apron and started getting ready for the day. But something had changed. Every move, every interaction with the customers now carried a new meaning. She was no longer just a waitress, she was a future co-owner. Throughout the day, Harper found herself observing the cafeteria with new eyes. She noticed the areas that needed repair, the moments when the workflow could be more efficient, the little things that made customers smile. Her mind was full of ideas and possibilities, but there were also worries. How would the other employees react when they heard about the change? How would she balance her new role as owner with the relationship she had with her co-workers? And most importantly, how would she ensure that Sunrise Diner retained its soul, its unique character, amidst all these changes? When her shift finally ended, Harper was exhausted but excited. She changed quickly and headed to the cafe where she had arranged to meet Alexander. When she arrived, she saw him sitting at a table in the corner with several papers spread out in front of him. "Hi," she said, taking a seat. "I see you came prepared." Alexander smiled, pushing a cup of coffee towards her. "I thought you might need this. And yes, I thought it would be good to start looking at some concrete figures." For the next 90 minutes, they immersed themselves in spreadsheets, financial projections, and business plans. Alexander was patient, explaining every detail and answering all of Harper's questions. To her surprise, Harper discovered that she was understanding more than she had expected. Years of managing the day-to-day running of the snack bar had given her an instinct for numbers that she hadn't known she possessed. "That's a lot to take in," Harper finally said, leaning back in her chair. Alexander nodded understandingly. "I know, and I want you to know that I don't expect you to become a financial expert overnight. We're in this together, Harper. We're going to learn and grow together." There was a sincerity in his words that touched Harper. For the first time since all this madness began, she felt that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. "So, what's the next step?" she asked, feeling more confident than she had in years. Alexander smiled, a glint of enthusiasm in his eyes. "Well, I think it's time to make it official. Tomorrow, we can meet with my lawyer to draw up the partnership agreement. And then," he paused dramatically, "we start turning the Sunrise Diner into the place we always knew it could be." Harper couldn't help but smile. "You know, when you first walked into that diner, I never imagined we'd be here now." "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Alexander laughed. "But I'm glad we're here. I think we make a great team, Harper." As they said goodbye and Harper walked home, she felt a mixture of emotions. Fear of the unknown. Yes, but also an excitement she hadn't felt for a long time. Tomorrow would be the start of a new chapter in her life, and for the first time in a long time, she couldn't wait to see what the future held. That night, lying in her bed, Harper stared at the ceiling, her mind filled with dreams and plans for the Sunrise Diner. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome, but she also knew that, with her passion for the place and Alexander's vision, they could create something truly special. With a smile on her lips, Harper finally fell asleep, dreaming of golden waffles, steaming cups of coffee, and a bright future that she couldn't wait to start building. The lawyer's office was a stark contrast to the cozy atmosphere of the Sunrise Diner. Harper felt out of place among the mahogany walls and imposing bookcases. Sitting next to Alexander, she nervously adjusted the collar of her more formal blouse, a piece she rarely wore. "Is everything all right?" Alexander whispered, noticing her unease. Harper nodded, forcing a smile. "Just a little nervous. I've never signed anything so important before." The lawyer, a middle-aged man called Richard Hawthorne, entered the room carrying a thick briefcase. "Well, let's get started, shall we?" he said, taking a seat behind his imposing desk. Over the next 2 hours, they went over every line of the partnership agreement. Harper was impressed by Alexander's attention to detail. Each of his conditions had been carefully included, along with clauses she hadn't even thought to consider. And with that, Richard finally said. "I think we've reached the end. Any questions before we sign?" Harper looked at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. "I don't think so," she replied, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. With slightly trembling hands, Harper took the pen offered by Richard. She hesitated for a moment, the tip of the pen hovering over the paper. This was a decisive moment, a point of no return. "Harper," Alexander said softly, "if you need more time." She shook her head, a determined smile forming on her lips. "No, I'm ready." And with that, she signed her name with a flourish. Alexander signed soon after, and Richard put his official seal on the document. "Congratulations," the lawyer smiled. "You are now officially partners." Leaving the office, Harper felt as if she were floating. The reality of what had just happened had not yet fully settled in. "So, partner," Alexander smiled, "what do you say we celebrate?" Harper laughed, feeling light for the first time in days. "I think we should, but not in some fancy restaurant. How about the Sunrise Diner? After all, it's our place now." "Perfect," Alexander agreed, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. At the Sunrise Diner, they were greeted with curious looks from the staff. No one knew yet about the change of ownership or the new partnership. "I think it's time to tell them," Harper said, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Alexander nodded, standing up. "Attention, everyone," he called out, his voice clear and confident. "We have an important announcement to make." Over the next few minutes, they explained the situation to the team. There was a mixture of reactions, surprise, confusion, and, to Harper's relief, even some enthusiasm. "So nothing's going to change?" asked Lisa, one of the older waitresses. "Some things will change," Harper answered honestly, "but the heart of Sunrise Diner, the people who make this place what it is, that will remain the same." After the announcement, Harper and Alexander sat down to enjoy a meal together, discussing their plans for the future. "I've been thinking," Alexander said between mouthfuls of waffle, "that we could start with some small improvements, maybe upgrade some equipment in the kitchen." Harper nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. "What about expanding the coffee menu? I've noticed that a lot of customers have been asking for more varied options." They spent the next hour immersed in a lively discussion about ideas and plans. Alexander's enthusiasm was infectious, and Harper found herself getting more and more excited about the possibilities. However, as the evening progressed, a new sensation began to creep into Harper's mind. As she watched the regulars come and go, laughing and chatting as they always did, she felt a tightening in her chest. "Alexander," she said softly, interrupting his excited description of a new digital ordering system, "do you think we're doing the right thing?" He paused, looking at her with concern. "What do you mean?" Harper gestured around. "All of this. These changes. What if we lose what makes this place special? What if, in trying to improve things, that we end up ruining them?" Alexander was silent for a moment, considering her words. "Harper," he finally said, his voice gentle, "I understand your fear. Believe me, I have my worries too, but that's why we're doing this together. Your connection to this place, your love for it, is what will keep us on the right path." His words calmed her down a little, but the worry still lingered. "Promise me one thing," she said, looking him in the eye. "If at any point we feel like we're losing the essence of this place, we'll stop and reassess. Promise me that you'll listen if I say something isn't right." "I promise," Alexander replied without hesitation. "This partnership is about mutual trust, Harper. Your intuition, your knowledge of this place and the people is as valuable as any business plan I can draw up." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of planning and discussions. When they finally closed the cafeteria, long after the usual time, Harper felt exhausted, but strangely invigorated. "Tomorrow is a new day," Alexander smiled as they said goodbye. "The first day of the rest of our lives," Harper laughed, shaking her head. "That sounds terribly cliché, you know." "Sometimes clichés exist for a reason," he winked. As they walked home, Harper reflected on what a whirlwind the last few days had been. Her life had changed completely in less than a week, from waitress to co-owner, from employee to entrepreneur. But as the lights of Portland shone around her, Harper felt a new determination forming inside her. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging. Yes, there would be obstacles and moments of doubt, but she was ready to face them. The Sunrise Diner had always been more than just a job to her. It was a home, a family, and now, with Alexander by her side, she had the chance to make it even more special. Arriving home, Harper took off her shoes and threw herself on the sofa, exhausted but happy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures. But for the first time in a long time, she was looking forward to facing them. With a smile on her lips, she closed her eyes, dreaming of golden waffles, steaming cups of coffee, and a bright future that she couldn't wait to start building. The Sunrise Diner was about to enter a new era, and Harper was determined to make sure it was the best era yet. The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the Portland skyline when Harper arrived at the Sunrise Diner. The cool morning air carried a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Today was the day the first changes would be implemented. As she opened the door, she was greeted by the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with something new, the smell of fresh paint. Overnight, a team had been working to give the entrance to the cafeteria a new look. "Morning, boss," the excited voice of Mike, the head cook, echoed from the kitchen. Harper still wasn't used to being called that. "Morning, Mike," she replied, hanging up her coat. "How's the news in the kitchen?" Mike appeared in the doorway, his face glowing with excitement. "That new oven is a marvel, Harper. I can't wait to try out some of the new recipes we discussed." Harper smiled, pleased to see the enthusiasm of the team. Over the last few weeks, she and Alexander had worked tirelessly to implement gradual changes, always consulting the team and regular customers. The doorbell jingled and Alexander entered, carrying a box. "Good morning, partner," he smiled. "I've brought you a surprise." Curious, Harper approached as he opened the box, revealing a collection of new customized aprons for the staff, with the redesigned Sunrise Diner logo embroidered on them. "They're beautiful," Harper whispered, running her fingers through the soft fabric. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Regular customers came in, their expressions a mixture of surprise and curiosity at the small changes. To Harper's relief, most of the reactions were positive. However, not everything was running smoothly. The new digital ordering system that Alexander had insisted on implementing was causing confusion among some of the older staff. "I don't understand this thing," Lisa, one of the more experienced waitresses, grumbled, frustrated with the tablet in her hands. "Why can't we just use paper orders like we always have?" Harper felt a twinge of concern. She had expressed reservations about implementing so many technological changes at once, but Alexander had insisted that it was necessary in order to modernize the business. "Let me help," Harper offered, guiding Lisa through the process. But as she explained, she couldn't help but notice the disapproving looks from some of the customers waiting to place their orders. As the day progressed, small problems kept cropping up. The new expanded menu, although exciting, was overloading the kitchen. Orders were taking longer than usual, and Harper could feel the tension growing among both customers and staff. During a moment of calm, Alexander pulled Harper into a corner. "Things seem a little tense," he observed, his tone cautious. Harper sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I think we may have tried to do too much at once," she admitted. "The staff are stressed, the customers are impatient." Alexander frowned, clearly not expecting this reaction. "But these changes are necessary, Harper. In order to grow, we need to modernize." I know, Harper replied, feeling torn between her loyalty to Alexander's vision and her concern for the well-being of the staff and customers. "But maybe we need to slow down a bit, give people time to adjust." Before Alexander could reply, a bang from the kitchen caught both their attention. Rushing to see what had happened, they found Mike surrounded by a pile of broken dishes, his face red with frustration. "I can't keep up," he exclaimed. "All these new dishes, the new system. It's too much." Harper felt her heart squeeze. Mike had always been the pillar of the kitchen, calm under pressure. Seeing him like this was a clear sign that things were getting out of hand. "It's all right, Mike," she said softly, helping him to his feet. "We'll sort it out." Turning to Alexander, Harper saw the concern in his eyes. "I think we need to rethink some things," she said firmly. Alexander nodded slowly, the reality of the situation finally setting in. "You're right. Maybe I got too carried away with all these changes." The rest of the day was dedicated to putting out metaphorical fires. Harper went from desk to desk, listening to customers' concerns, while Alexander worked with the team to solve the most pressing problems with the new system. When they finally closed the doors that evening, long after normal hours, the exhaustion was palpable in the air. "Everyone," Harper called out, gathering the team together. "First, I want to thank everyone for their efforts today. I know it's been a tough day." She paused, exchanging a glance with Alexander before continuing. "We made mistakes. We tried to do too much, too fast, and for that, we apologize." Alexander stepped forward. "From tomorrow, we'll be rolling back some of the changes. The paper ordering system will be back and we'll reduce the menu to something more manageable." A collective sigh of relief went through the team. "But," Harper added, "that doesn't mean we're going to give up on improving. We're just going to do it more gradually, listening to you every step of the way." After the meeting, as the team prepared to leave, Harper and Alexander stayed behind, sitting at one of the tables. "You know," Alexander said after a moment's silence, "when I bought this place, I thought I knew exactly what it would take to make it an even bigger success." Harper looked at him, surprised by the admission. "But today," he continued, "I realized that true success isn't just in the numbers or the modernization. It's in the people, in the community we've built here." Harper felt a smile forming on her lips. "That's why we make a good team, Alexander. You have the vision for the future and you have the heart of this place," he added, smiling back. They spent the next hour discussing plans for the future, but this time with a new perspective. Each idea was evaluated not only for its profit potential, but for how it would affect the staff and customers. When they finally left the diner, the moon was already high in the Portland sky. Harper looked up at the Sunrise Diner sign, now with new lighting that made it glow softly in the night. "Tomorrow is a new day," she said, echoing Alexander's words from weeks ago. He laughed, recognizing the reference. "And this time, we'll face it together, step by step." As they walked, each to their own home, Harper reflected on the day's events. It had been difficult, yes, but also enlightening. She had learned more about leadership, partnership, and the true meaning of change in that single day than in years of work. Sunrise Diner was on a journey of transformation, but now Harper was confident that they could navigate these turbulent waters. With Alexander by her side, and with the dedication of the team and the support of loyal customers, she knew they could create something truly special, a place that honored the past while embracing the future. With one last look at the cafeteria, Harper smiled to herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready to face them. After all, sometimes it takes a little storm to truly appreciate the sunrise. The weeks that followed the day of chaos, as the Sunrise Diner team affectionately began to call it, were marked by a much more cautious approach to change. Harper and Alexander had learned a valuable lesson about the balance between innovation and tradition. One sunny Saturday morning, Harper arrived at the diner to find a queue forming outside. Her heart leapt. Could it be another problem? But as she approached, she heard laughter and animated conversation. The faces in the queue were familiar, regular customers mixed with a few new ones, all looking eager and excited. "What's going on here?" she asked an elderly woman she recognized as Mrs. Peterson, a long-time customer. Mrs. Peterson smiled radiantly. "Oh dear, we've all come to try the new special Saturday breakfast you announced. It looks delicious." Harper blinked in surprise. The special Saturday breakfast had been an idea that she and Alexander had discussed only a few days ago. It was a way of introducing new items to the menu in a controlled way, testing the customer's reaction without overloading the kitchen. Walking in quickly, she found Alexander already inside, helping Mike get the kitchen ready for the rush. "Looks like we've got a hit on our hands," she said, unable to contain her smile. Alexander looked at her, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I told you it would be a good idea. People love new things, as long as we don't mess with their old favorites too much." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. The new Saturday special menu, which included pumpkin waffles with maple syrup and a goat's cheese omelette with fresh herbs, was a resounding success. The team worked in perfect sync, the new ordering system, now simplified and with a paper backup option, running smoothly. During a brief pause, Harper found herself observing the scene before her. The cafeteria was full, the buzz of conversation and laughter filling the air. In one corner, a group of teenagers were taking selfies with their elaborate milkshakes, another recent addition to the menu. In another, an elderly couple shared a piece of traditional apple pie, an item they had flatly refused to change. "It's quite a sight, isn't it?" Alexander's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He was standing next to her, also observing the scene with a look of satisfaction. Harper nodded. "It's amazing how we've managed to find a balance, new ideas living side by side with traditions." "Speaking of new ideas," Alexander said, his tone becoming more serious, "there's something I wanted to discuss with you." They made their way to the small office at the back, now shared by both of them. Alexander closed the door and sat down, his expression a mixture of excitement and caution. "I received an interesting proposal yesterday," he began. "A restaurant chain heard about the changes we've made here and was impressed with our results." Harper felt a twinge of apprehension. "What kind of proposal?" "They want us to expand," Alexander said, his words coming out quickly. "Open more Sunrise Diner locations in other parts of the city, maybe even in other towns in the state." Silence fell between them, heavy with the implications of this revelation. Harper felt her mind spinning, conflicting thoughts and emotions fighting for dominance. I don't know what to say," she finally managed to articulate. "That's big." Alexander nodded, leaning forward. "I know it's a huge decision, and I didn't even want to consider it without talking to you first. We're partners in this, Harper. Your opinion is crucial." Harper stood up, walking over to the small office window that overlooked the main hall. Outside, she could see Lisa laughing with a group of regulars, Mike coming out of the kitchen with a steaming plate, the smile on his face indicating that he was proud of his creation. "Alexander," she began, turning to face him, "when you first came here, you talked about preserving the soul of this place, about keeping what makes it special." He nodded, remembering her words. "If we expand," Harper continued, "how can we ensure that each new unit has that same essence? It's not just about the menu or the decor. It's about the people, the connections, the stories that unfold here every day." Alexander was silent for a moment, considering his words. "You're right," he finally said. "It wouldn't be easy. But what if we could? What if we could take some of that magic to other places, give more people the chance to experience what makes Sunrise Diner so special?" Harper felt an internal conflict. Part of her was thrilled at the idea of growing, of sharing what they had built with a wider audience, but another part feared losing the intimacy, the personal touch that defined Sunrise Diner. "We don't need to decide now," Alexander said softly, noticing her hesitation. "It's just an idea at the moment. We can think about it, discuss it with the team, maybe even survey our regular customers." Harper nodded slowly. "You're right. We shouldn't rush into anything. We've learned that lesson already, haven't we?" They shared a smile, remembering the day of chaos and how much they had grown since then. "Let's do it," Harper finally said. "Let's explore the idea, but with caution. And if at some point we feel like we're missing out on what makes this place special, we step back," Alexander added. Together. They sealed the deal with a handshake, the weight of the decision hanging between them. But there was also a sense of excitement, of unexplored possibilities. When they returned to the main hall, Harper looked around with new eyes. Every table, every customer, every member of staff was part of the complex tapestry that was Sunrise Diner. The idea of replicating that, of sharing that magic with others, was both thrilling and daunting. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity, but Harper couldn't get the conversation with Alexander out of her head. As she served customers, chatted with the staff and solved the little day-to-day problems, she found herself imagining what it would be like to have multiple Sunrise Diner units. At the end of the day, as the last customer left, and they began to clean up. Harper gathered the team together. "Guys," she began, exchanging a glance with Alexander, "there's something we'd like to discuss with you. It's just an idea at the moment, but we want to hear what you think." As she explained the proposed expansion, she saw a mixture of reactions on the faces around her. Surprise, excitement, concern, all the emotions she herself had experienced earlier. "We're not making any decisions right now," Alexander added. "We want you all to be part of this process. After all, the Sunrise Diner is as much yours as it is ours." The discussions that followed were lively, with ideas and concerns being shared freely. Harper felt a surge of pride as she saw how her team had become a real family, united by their shared love for this little corner of Portland. Later, as she closed the diner, Harper paused for a moment, taking in the stillness of the place. The smell of coffee and apple pie still hung in the air, mixed with the aroma of the new recipes they had introduced. She thought about all the changes they had faced in recent months, the challenges they had overcome, and the victories they had celebrated. The idea of expansion was just another chapter in that journey. With a smile, Harper turned off the lights and stepped out into the Portland night. The future was uncertain, but one thing she knew for sure. As long as they kept the heart of Sunrise Diner intact, as long as they continued to value people and connections above all else, they could face any challenge that came their way. Sunrise would bring a new day, new possibilities, and perhaps the beginning of a new era for Sunrise Diner. And Harper couldn't wait to see what the future held. Autumn had arrived in Portland, bringing with it an explosion of color and fresh air that seemed full of possibilities. 6 months had passed since the proposed expansion, and Sunrise Diner was about to face its biggest challenge yet. Harper was standing in front of an empty building in the Hawthorne neighborhood, a few miles from the original diner. The sign above the door was still covered, but she knew what it said. Sunrise Diner, Hawthorne. It was surreal to think that in just 1 week, this empty space would become the second Sunrise Diner. "Penny for your thoughts," Alexander's voice snapped her out of her reverie. He approached, 2 travel cups of coffee in his hands. Harper accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "Just trying to process all this. It seems like yesterday we were discussing whether or not to expand." Alexander nodded, his eyes scanning the facade of the building. "It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? But look how much we've accomplished in such a short time." He wasn't exaggerating. In the months following the initial proposal, they had plunged headlong into the expansion process. Market research, location scouting, endless negotiations with landlords and suppliers. Every step had been a challenge, but also a learning opportunity. "Shall we take a look inside?" Alexander suggested, already heading for the door. The interior was a whirlwind of activity. Construction teams were working tirelessly to transform the empty space into the cozy eatery they had envisioned. Harper could see the outlines of what it would become: the long, shiny counter, the cozy booths, the open kitchen space that would allow customers to see the magic happening. "It's amazing how much it's looking like the original, but yet different," Harper commented, running her hand over one of the newly installed tables. Alexander smiled. "That was the goal. Remember? To keep the essence, but allow each location to have its own personality." They had spent countless hours debating exactly that, how to replicate what made Sunrise Diner special without it looking like a generic copy. The solution had been to incorporate unique elements from each neighborhood into the design and menu, while keeping the classic favorites that customers loved. As they walked through the space, discussing the final details with the construction manager, Harper's phone rang. It was Lisa from the original diner. "Harper, we've got a bit of a problem here." Lisa's voice sounded tense. "The new chef we hired to replace Mike, well, he kind of collapsed in the kitchen." Harper closed her eyes, feeling a pang of guilt. Mike, her faithful chef for so many years, had been promoted to oversee the kitchens of both units. His absence from the original eatery was being felt more than they had anticipated. "I'm on my way," Harper replied, already heading for the exit. She cast an apologetic glance at Alexander. "Duty calls. Can you handle things around here?" He nodded, understanding. "Go on. I'll take care of everything here." The drive back to the original diner seemed longer than ever. Harper couldn't help but reflect on the challenges they were facing. The expansion was testing not only their financial and logistical resources, but also the very fabric of the community they had built. When she arrived, she found the kitchen in a state of controlled chaos. The new chef, a talented young man called Ryan, was sitting in a corner, looking completely defeated. "Ryan," Harper approached cautiously. "What happened?" He looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion. I can't do it, Harper. I thought I could fill Mike's shoes, but it's too much. The expectations, the pressure." Harper felt her heart squeeze. She remembered her own journey, how overwhelmed she felt when she took on more responsibility. "Ryan, listen," she said, sitting down next to him. "Nobody expects you to be Mike. We want you to be yourself, with your own style and ideas." Over the next few minutes, Harper worked not only to calm Ryan down, but to reorganize the kitchen. She called Mike by video, asking for some guidance, and together they managed to get everything back on track. When the crisis was finally under control, Harper found herself exhausted, but strangely invigorated. This incident had been a vivid reminder of the challenges of growing up, of trying to replicate something as personal and unique as the Sunrise Diner's atmosphere. That evening, after the diner had closed, Harper called a team meeting. Alexander joined them, having finished matters at the new unit. "Everyone," Harper began, looking at the familiar faces around her. "Today has been an interesting day." There was some tired laughter in response. "But it was also an important day," she continued. "It reminded us of something crucial. The Sunrise Diner isn't just a place, it's not just a menu or a decor, it's us, all of us." Alexander took a step forward. "What Harper is saying is that, as we grow, we need to remember what brought us here. We're not just expanding a business, we're expanding a family." The words seemed to touch something in the team. Ryan, still looking a little shaken, spoke. I want to apologize for what happened today. I promise I'll try harder." Mike, who had arrived in the middle of the meeting, put a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Hey, kid, don't be so hard on yourself. Remember how long it took me to get that waffle recipe right? We're all learning here." The tension in the room seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of renewed camaraderie. In the minutes that followed, the team shared ideas, concerns, and even a few jokes about the challenges they faced. When the meeting ended, Harper found herself filled with a new determination. Yes, the expansion was a huge challenge. Yes, there would be difficult days ahead. But looking at the people around her, she knew they had what it took to succeed. Later, as she and Alexander were closing the cafeteria, he turned to her with a tired but satisfied smile. You know, when I started all this, I thought it was just about business, but you've shown me that it's much more than that." Harper smiled back. "It's about connections, about creating a place where people feel at home, no matter where we are." They stepped out into the cool fall evening, the air charged with the promise of what was to come. The following week would bring the grand opening of the new unit, a giant step in their journey. But at that moment, looking at the diner that had become so much more than just a place of work, Harper felt a wave of gratitude. No matter how much they grew or how many challenges they faced, the heart of Sunrise Diner would remain the same, a place of connection, community, and endless possibilities. With one last look at the familiar sign, Harper and Alexander said goodbye, each going their separate ways, but united by the shared dream they were building together. The future was uncertain, but with their team by their side, they were ready to face anything that came their way. The day of the grand opening of the new Sunrise Diner in Hawthorne dawned with a clear sky and a bright sun, as if the universe itself was smiling on the new venture. Harper woke up even before the alarm clock went off, her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. She arrived early at the original diner, finding Alexander already there, going over a final checklist. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, a nervous smile on his normally confident face. Harper took a deep breath. "As ready as I can be. It's strange, you know. I feel like we're about to send our son off to college." Alexander laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing a little. I know exactly what you mean. But hey, we raised a great kid, didn't we? They spent the next hour in a frenzy of activity, coordinating the last preparations between the two units. Mike went back and forth between the kitchens, making sure everything was perfect in both places. Ryan, now more confident after the previous week's incident, led the team in the original cafeteria with renewed determination. At 9 a.m. sharp, Harper and Alexander stood in front of the new unit in Hawthorne, ready to cut the inaugural ribbon. A small crowd had gathered, loyal customers of the original diner, curious onlookers from the neighborhood, and even a few local reporters. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice firm despite the nervousness evident in his eyes, "today is not just the opening of a new eatery. It's the continuation of a story of community, of family, and of good meals shared." Harper stepped forward. "Sunrise Diner has always been more than just a place to eat. It's a home away from home for many of you, and we promise that this new unit will carry on that same spirit." Together, they cut the ribbon, and the doors opened to a wave of applause and cheers. The first customers poured in, their eyes wide with wonder at the welcoming interior that somehow managed to capture the essence of the original diner, but with a uniquely Hawthorne twist. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind. Harper found herself bouncing between the two units, making sure everything ran smoothly in both places. In Hawthorne, she saw families settling into the new booths, sampling the familiar dishes and new menu items inspired by the neighborhood. At the original diner, longtime customers shared stories about the Sunrise Diner, with the curious new faces that had been drawn in by the commotion. In the middle of the afternoon, exhausted but exhilarated, Harper finally had a moment to sit down. She chose a table in the new unit, observing the movement around her. Alexander joined her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "So," he said, handing her a cup, "what do you think? Did we make it?" Harper took a sip, letting the familiar aroma of coffee envelop her. She looked around, seeing the smiles on the customers' faces, hearing the laughter and animated conversations. In the kitchen, she could see the new team working in perfect sync, as if they had been doing this for years. "You know," she began, a smile forming on her lips, "when you first showed up at that diner, all dressed up and clearly out of your element, I could never have imagined we'd get here." Alexander laughed. "I confess that I had no idea what I was getting into either. I thought it would just be a good investment, but it turned out to be much more than that." Harper nodded, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "You changed my life, Alexander. Not just financially, but you gave me the chance to dream bigger, to do something really meaningful." "No, Harper," Alexander replied, his voice soft. "We changed our lives, together. You taught me the true value of a community, of building something with heart. Without you, this would just be another restaurant chain without a soul." At that moment, as if orchestrated by fate, the door opened and a familiar face walked in. It was Mr. Thompson, the former owner of the original Sunrise Diner. "Mr. Thompson," Harper exclaimed, rising to greet him. "What a wonderful surprise." Mr. Thompson smiled, his eyes shining with excitement as he looked around. "You couldn't miss the grand opening, could you? My God, you two, just look at this place. It's incredible." Alexander joined them, extending his hand to Mr. Thompson. "All this was only possible because of the foundation you built, sir. The Sunrise Diner will always be your legacy." The three of them talked for a few minutes, sharing stories and laughter. When Mr. Thompson finally said goodbye to explore the rest of the diner, Harper felt a wave of emotion run through her. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" she said, turning to Alexander. "It's not just a dream or a plan on a piece of paper. It's real." Alexander nodded, a determined glint in his eyes. "And that's just the beginning, Harper. Think of all the communities we can impact, all the stories we can help create." At that moment, Harper clearly saw the future before her. Not just 1 or 2 diners, but a chain of Sunrise Diners, each unique, each a reflection of the community it served, but all united by the same spirit of welcome and connection. The rest of the day passed in a blur of celebrations, small challenges overcome and moments of pure joy. When it was finally time to close, Harper gathered the teams from both units for a toast. "To the Sunrise Diner family," she said, raising her coffee cup. "Old and new, original and expansion, we're all part of something special here." Alexander joined her. "And for the future, may we continue to grow, to learn and to serve our communities with the same love and dedication that brought us here." As everyone toasted and celebrated, Harper felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. She looked at Alexander, the man who had come into her life as a stranger and was now an indispensable partner, a friend. Outside, the lights of Portland sparkled against the night sky. The city seemed full of endless possibilities. And in the heart of that city, two cozy diners were ready to welcome the sunrise of a new day, ready to serve not just meals, but moments, memories, and connections. Harper smiled to herself. The millionaire had bought the diner to be close to her, yes, but in the process, they had built something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. It wasn't just about control or power. It was about creating a legacy, about making a difference in people's lives, one cup of coffee at a time. As she closed the doors of the new unit, Harper took one last look at the cozy interior. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new possibilities, and she couldn't wait to face each one of them, with her Sunrise Diner family by her side. Sunrise was just beginning for Sunrise Diner, and the future had never looked brighter.